So cool. Well, thanks everybody for being here this morning, bright and early. Hope everyone had fun at the side events last night, whichever one you ended up at. But we are here today at the Transfero Stage. We're going to be talking a bit about regulation, public policy issues, which is kind of a hot topic in crypto these days, right? There's a lot going on, not just in Brazil, but in the U.S., in Europe, other jurisdictions as well. And this is all part of the maturation process of the industry. So it's really kind of exciting inflection point where crypto is finally truly becoming a mainstream thing, and that's being evidenced by some of the public policy actions that we're seeing around the world. So we're going to be diving into that today here. Before we dive in, actually, make sure you scan that QR code up there and fill out the little survey. And then if you do that, you'll be entitled to some swag that you can pick up after the panel at the booth over here. So be sure to do that. And so yeah, after the panel, just go over there. You can get the swag if you fill out the survey. So yeah, so we'll dive right in here. We'll go for about 30 minutes ish, and then we'll open it up for questions if folks have questions. So be thinking, just if you have something in your mind that pops up over the course of the talk, just keep that in the back of your mind, and then wait till about 30 minutes ish. We'll pass a mic around for questions. So my name's Stanley. I'm a YouTuber, content creator, strategic comms guy. I have a podcast called Brazil Crypto Report that explores the digital asset ecosystem in Brazil, Latin America, trying to do content in English language about what's happening here in the region. And I'm really excited to be here at the Transfero Stage with everybody talking about this subject. We're joined by a really cool panel here. We've got Daniel Mangabeira of Circle, formerly of Binance, and then we've got Alvaro of BitGo, and we've got Juliana from Transfero. And maybe just to start off, everyone take like 30, 45 seconds. Just give yourself a quick introduction.
I go first. So, good morning, everyone. Very nice to be here. Thanks, Transfero, for the invite. Your setup is beautiful. Your booth is beautiful. I was coming from Circle's booth, and it pales before what you guys have here. So, my name is Daniel Mangabeira. I'm currently the Vice President for Strategy and Policy at Circle for the whole of Latin America. I've been in the crypto space working for the past 3.5 years. So prior to Circle, I was with Binance, and before that, I was with BitGo. But I've been in the industry personally for 7-ish years as a curious person, and then as an investor. And I've been living the crypto life, and it's been really consuming me wholeheartedly. Happy to be here. Hope we have a good discussion.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alvaro. I'm from Venezuela, and I came in crypto around 7 years ago and defined myself as a stablecoin maxi, because I think that the stablecoins are a way for people to solve a lot of problems. Happy to be here. Thanks, Transfero, for having me.
Hi, I'm Juliana. I'm the current Chief Revenue Officer from Transfero, and I have an experience on emerging technologies. I worked several years at LinkedIn. Previously, I worked at Paxos, which is a stablecoin issuer and a crypto trading player. So I'm in the space for 3 to 4 years and happy to discuss more on regulation, something that is super important for adoption and mainstream.
Awesome. So let's start off with kind of the big topic here, which I think is of most interest, is that in the last 6 months, we've seen a pretty massive U-turn on the kind of the public policy front as it relates to crypto globally. We've had MiCA come into play in Europe, which has created a framework there for kind of a legal pathway for virtual asset service providers, for stablecoin issuers, et cetera. We have a pro-crypto U.S. administration now, which for the previous 6-7 years, the U.S. had been pretty hostile to crypto, and all of a sudden we have a very pro-crypto government, more so than people were expecting. And so the scene has really changed pretty dramatically in a pretty short period of time. So I'm hoping maybe we'll turn to Daniel and Alvaro. Would love to get some just kind of color from you on, the big picture, 30,000-foot view of just how the scenario has changed here in the last 6-8 months-ish.
I think you nailed it when you say that we've been experiencing some very important changes over the past months, right? So I kicked off introducing myself and sharing a bit of my history of crypto. Let me just tell you an anecdote. When I was with my previous company, my past life, I remember that my first week, I had the cover of one very well-known magazine here portraying, the then CEO of my company saying the black box of the name of the company, right? And to me, that was a shock because it was an image that the industry and the company specific was conveying that was not really true to what the company or the industry was trying to do. And I think that back in the day, regulators or lawmakers, overarchingly, was really opposing the narrative, right? The concept and the philosophy behind that. They were leaving no room for us to actually build something, right? I think that right now, I was in an event in Buenos Aires, a month ago, a few weeks ago, and it surprised me how welcoming regulators and the governments they were to crypto people and to crypto companies, right? So I think that conceptually and philosophy-wise, again, it's you see how regulators and countries and policymakers, those guys, they now understand a bit more the value that crypto as a technology and as a narrative can bring to countries. So I think that this is part of the change as well. I think that to me, it's not only the opportunity to actually organize and build stuff, but actually the opportunity to understand the value that this could bring ultimately to people, right, and to systems. We're talking here about, tomorrow I'm gonna give a speech here talking about the future of money, and I truly believe that we're talking about, building new technologies for something that has been part of our lives forever. Money ultimately is technology, and we're really truly talking about how to upgrade it. So I think that reflects on the thinking of regulators, policymakers, and how they need to actually organize something that is already a fact of our lives.
Yeah, I came from traditional crypto, and I lived some crypto winters. And for me, it's exciting news that the governments and the regulators are open to the technology right now. We saw a radical shift after Mika because we needed a regulation in order to have a massive adoption. There is no massive adoption without regulation, and I think that the most important thing here is that the world right now is looking crypto with another eyes, starting with Mika and later with the U.S. government. I think that here in Latin America, we can have a good framework in the next months about regulation and how we can work together in order to have massive adoption, a lot of use cases, and it's going to change the things how we know right now.
And from my perspective, I see that if we think about crypto, it started with Bitcoin, something more Robinhood style, but then we see how the government, how the regulators, and how the financial system understand blockchain as the main technology and how we need to reshape the financial system. And I feel like we're in a really important moment, even in Brazil, that we have a soon regulation in crypto, maybe stable coins, to make sure that we get this regulation on the mainstream. And I feel like Brazilian Central Bank is doing a great job engaging with the market, with all the players from technology, finance, to make sure that they find the right trilemma and all the things related to privacy and safety. But I feel like now they understand that this technology come to stay, and it will be the new financial system platform, and how we can enable this with consumer protection in the right way. And as Mangabeira mentioned, the regulators are really open to this topic. They want to learn with the market and companies that are building it since like 10, 15 years ago, where it was not so discussed as it is now. So I see as a really positive moment for us to structure those.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, and it does feel like we are at the cusp of this Wild West Wall Street transition, as is the name of this panel. I think this is going to be the year. I mean, I kind of say this, I've been saying this jokingly over the course of this week, where if you'd have told me in 2017 that the most exciting use case for crypto in mid-2025 would be stable coins, I would have probably thought you were kind of crazy or maybe like whatever. But I think we've hit this point where I think the stablecoin adoption, like the acceptance, the narrative around stablecoins, and also just Bitcoin, the idea of Bitcoin as a reserve asset, a digital gold, ETFs approved. we're very close to finally crossing this chasm where crypto just becomes sort of an embedded part of the traditional financial system. As an improvement to the infrastructure, but also in addition, kind of adding on additional new types of products and new types of things that you couldn't do otherwise. You couldn't do in the previous system. So maybe I want to turn this back to Daniel here. And in Circle Land, you guys talk about this idea of kind of programmable money and instant payments, and this internet native money is really kind of the killer application of crypto. And obviously, there's the ability to send and receive money, but there's additional things you can do on top of that once you have that infrastructure in place. But maybe tell us a bit more about just like once you have this kind of internet native money, like what does this unlock that we should be excited about that is potentially relevant in the public policy context here?
Thanks, Aaron. I love this question because when we think about what this internet native money can unlock, we're really talking about what are the current problems that we face with the legacy structures that we would like to see changed, right? This is actually what the discussion is all about. And today, when we think about closed loop functioning of financial structures, when we think about cheap, slow, cumbersome processes, when we think about, we are all originated. I think all. I mean, I see some non-Latin American faces around here, but Latin America is still a place where more than half of the population is unbanked or poorly banked, right? And we're talking about a technology where, with any single device with access to internet, you're immediately part of the system, right? So when I think of what this could unlock, is basically freedom and empowerment to people. So it sounds like a socialist motto. I promise you it's not. But I think it's really allowing technology to follow its course and make society a better place for people to live with the potentialities that it has for people to seize. So I think that talking about specifics, again, we're talking about a system that works in a faster way, more efficient way, a cheaper way, and anyone could be part of that. So again, I'm trying to speak more conceptually. I'm sure that we're going to dive deeper into more tactical aspects of crypto and digital assets and stablecoins. But just to allow my colleagues to talk about, I think that what this would unlock is a much freer and inclusive system, I guess.
Alvaro or Jude, you guys, either of you want to take that question?
Yeah, I believe that crypto can change the things how we know today. And it's important to give access to all the population, especially in countries where it's not a good financial infrastructure. Following that Daniel says is not as it's not a socialist thing. It's more than dreaming about to give more opportunities to our people in order to have access to stable money,
So I want to shift gears slightly here, and let's talk a bit about stablecoin legislation. And we've had Mika, however you want to pronounce it, come into play in Europe. Circle is obviously very heavily involved in those negotiations, and you're also very heavily involved in negotiations in the U.S. And also, there's stablecoin regulations also a topic here in Brazil. It's not maybe quite as mature, I guess. It's not necessarily a legislative issue. It's more of a regulatory issue at the central bank. But I believe BitGo, I believe you guys are regulated under Mika as well, right? There's a custody framework and that whole setup. So maybe let's talk a bit about what do you think that maybe Mika got right and or maybe got wrong as well. But like, what are some of the lessons that can be learned here in Brazil based on what we've seen being rolled out under the European framework, and perhaps like of what we've seen out of the U.S. framework thus far, even though it's nothing's official yet. But maybe Daniel, I'll turn this to you, and then Alvaro, I'd love for you to jump in on that as well.
Sure, and I'm happy to make this a more interactive thing if people want to jump in and comment. So I think that to me, one interesting way of answering this is to try and understand what we would like to see when regulations kick in, right? So again, we are part of this industry. So for us, what would be a positive outcome for regulatory conclusion, right? So I think that then again, mass adoption is one, right? Like you mentioned. institutional legitimacy is a different one. But I think to me, one thing that's very important is safety and consumer protection, right? So when you take a look at the banking system, right, the 100-year-old banking system, the heavily regulated banking system, they are heavily regulated for a reason, right? I'm not advocating for heavy regulations on top of crypto stable coins, please, right? But you take a look at banks, they're heavily regulated for reasons. They're heavily regulated because there was many things that happened across the 100 years that we've seen this industry to thrive, that actually push regulators to organize in a more strict way to protect people in the end of the day, right? So when we see stablecoin regulation, we look at MiCA, we look at the US, what's happening now. We look at Brazil, which a very interesting conundrum because it's both a regulatory thing, as Aaron mentioned, with the central bank, but it's also a lawmaking discussion, right? We do have a bill at the Congress, and this makes a very interesting discussion because we navigate, through two different very interesting scenes that sometimes communicate, sometimes not, but makes things interesting. But I think the bottom line here is what I'm trying to mention is that in all those regulations that actually saw the light of day, which is the case of MiCA, regulations that are being discussed in a very advanced fashion, which is the case of the US, regulations that are part of public consultations, which is the case of Brazil, but also the case of other jurisdictions, is that lawmakers and policymakers are trying to push the boundaries of regulatory structure to protect people. So when I think of stable coins, I do have to mention, reserve transparency, right? The guarantee to consumers that they can redeem one-to-one the stablecoin they invested at, transparency, auditing processes, right? So all of that needs to be ensured and enshrined on regulatory structure because otherwise we're not going to get to Wall Street. We're going to remain on Wild Wild West, right? So I think that if we are to have regulation endorsing the industry that we're part of, we need to have regulation ensuring and guaranteeing that people is going to be protected, and the path to growth is going to be guaranteed for people doing things in the right way, like we all are.
Yeah. After you have a good stablecoin with proof of reserve and excellent policies, you need a place to storage, and in this place, the main worry about regulators and banks and institutions is about custody, because you can have the best stablecoin in the market, but if you don't have the best policies about custody, you can offer trust to your clients. And I think that the complement of this stablecoin use is the custody, because where lies the customer funds I think that in order to offer trust to our customers, we need to offer the best policies on custody, and that's what we does.
And Ju, do you want to jump into that question as well from the Transfero side?
Yeah, I feel like it's amazing to see how the players are doing and shaping how the regulation will become a thing. And everything that we're doing is helping them to know the right path. But at the end of the day, the interoperability in a legal term is important because we will need to have a global economy running into these new rails. So it's super important that the regulators get aligned. Like MiCA, it's really something really important. In Brazil, it's making this a benchmark, but it's important to have the whole global working in the same rules and terms to enable money to move between jurisdictions with no problems.
And then how do you think this regulatory public policy U-turn that we were talking about earlier, this shift toward more crypto-friendly narratives, policies, et cetera, in Europe and the US, how is this impacting what we're seeing here in Latin America as governments like Argentina, Brazil are looking to implement their own regulatory frameworks? Has this had a positive spillover effect in some way, or is this maybe more of a case where the U.S. is finally catching up to what people have known here for some time already? Maybe Alvaro, you want to take that since you have the mic?
Yeah, I think that MiCA sets the bar in order to have our regulations. That at the end of the day, I think that the Latin American countries is going to copy the same MiCA rules and the travel rules in order to have a compatible regulations, because at the end of the day we are talking about world's money and cross-border payments, and I think at the end of the day we are going to have similar regulations. Is matter of time in order to the all the countries in Latin America act as a bloc like Europe in order to promote a similar regulation.
Can I just comment on this? I think that it's interesting to see the U-turn, but this is basically a U.S. thing, right? So, and it's basically a U.S. thing because the U.S. was one of the few countries that actually had this very stringent position in opposition to crypto, which was weird to see, by the way, right? But if we go back a few months or a couple of years, we see that the stance from Latin American regulators or policymakers has always been one that, if not entirely friendly to crypto, absolutely not in opposition to it, right? So if you take a look at the key countries, aside from Mexico, but at the very least Mexico with the fintech law they've enacted in 2018, they were the first country in Latin America to actually internalize crypto as a narrative in their legal structure, right? So, okay, from 2018 to 2025, we haven't seen much advancement in terms of regulatory structure. But in other countries, you take a look at Brazil. We've been having discussions for since 2015, right? Our legal structure, which is the Digital Assets Bill, was enacted in 2021 or 2022, if I'm not mistaken. And then we've been having discussions with regulators, not only the central bank, but CVM, in a very propositive, open, democratic way, right? So aiming towards something. And the same goes for Argentina. We do have a more friendly administration towards crypto, but crypto was a narrative since the past administration. The registration process to VASPs was something that exists already. So the same goes for Colombia, El Salvador. This could go on and on, right? And this is also a reflex of what we've been seeing in MiCA or in some other jurisdictions. But I do feel that Latin America has really a life in its own when it comes to understanding the potential of crypto and internalizing it through the build-up of regulatory framework. So I do think that we sit in a unique position, and we have the means to be, a region that leads this narrative across the world. We need to keep playing our cards right, I guess.
And then just a reminder that we will open it up for questions here in just a moment. So be thinking of your questions. I'll ask one more to the panel here, and then we'll open it up for questions. Actually, there's a two-part question that I'll pose to everybody here. What is your company's perhaps biggest regulatory public policy priority at the moment? And then hypothetically, if you had a magic wand or a genie in a bottle and you could make any change instantaneously to any policy-related change, snap of a finger, what would it be? Maybe start with Ju. Or Alvaro, since you have the
if I were a musician, maybe think on a global passport rule where we can all together things on a regulation who can fit on every continent, because with that global rule maybe we can have the mass adoption of our internet money, and also permits to everyone to have access and play with the same rules.
I think that there's not a magic wand or something that I would change. The thing is to adjust for the regulation that it will be in place soon. And I feel like from the 10 years that Transfero is in the market, building it from scratch with no reference, it's something that we can influence or share with the regulators to make sure that we share the learnings and the ways that we're doing well or not, to make sure that it's aligned with what we believe it's on the protection of the consumer.
So you ask about regulatory priorities, right? So I want to make two comments on this. So, try to segregate my answer in two different ways. So the first one is, I think when we talk about digital assets as a narrative and as an industry and regulation, I think that the key word still is legitimacy, right? I think that regulatory legitimacy is still the name of the game. It's not a given. It's not trivial. and it's something that still needs to be built, right? So again, even when we talk about MiCA, right? So MiCA needs secondary regulations. We talk about the US. US is still discussing its regulatory framework. We talk about Brazil. We do need secondary regulations coming from central bank or even CVM, and that goes on and on across jurisdictions. So I think that institutionalization or endorsement by regulation is still something that's very important. So when I think of regulatory priorities, that's still something that is on top of mind of companies like ours. And I think the second comment, Aaron, is that this is a bit of an unfair question to me because I'm part of a U.S. company. If my boss is ever watching this, so this is the answer that I should give. Regulatory priority for us is the U.S., right? But for me, and this is the part where you cut, and don't show this to Circle ELT, but to me, priorities, they lay on Latin America, right? I'm a Latin American, Brazilian. I've been following this industry and how the discussions are taking shape in our region for the past 6 to 7 years. I do think that we have all the means and conditions to lead that discussion, to lead that work. So I would love to see, us passing through and having all that regulatory discussion in our past so we can build together. When I say together, it's together with the industry, people that are using this, and also the regulatory scene. We do have the means, we do have people that actually, they're very knowledgeable about that. So we have the condition to do that. So that is my top priority. But again, working for Circle, go US, right?
All right. Well, maybe let's open up for questions here. Do we have a microphone that we can... right here. Yeah, maybe right here. And then feel free to introduce yourself as well. And then if you're directing your question toward a particular person, please specify.
It's to all of you.
Okay.
My name is Ana Carolina. I'm the CMO of ChatPayGo. And my question is, one of the core values of the crypto and blockchain Web3 is privacy and custody. And when we listen about regulation, we also talking about control. We're talking about control of custody. We're talking about control of data and information. And it also protects people and economy, but also has a dark side, especially when we talk about Latin America. In our recent history, we have confiscations, government confiscations. We have also bank bankruptcies. So how the regulators are open to let this control off the table and to embrace this kind of freedom for people.
I absolutely love your question, right? And I think there's so many elements in there that we could spend the whole day talking about that. So, obviously, no one here can speak for the government, right? So, I think that to imagine the state endorsing an industry is to imagine the state to some extent in order for them to secure, protection and functionality, they need to have some degree of control. Whether they're willing to actually let go of that control, it goes beyond my vain philosophy. I wouldn't be able to answer that. But I think that it's wrong for us to actually tackle the means to try to control or to secure the ends. I do have some degree of gray hair in my head, so I've been around what you mentioned, the confiscation, all the economic. But I think that this is largely a result of our economic condition, back in the 80s or the 90s, and the reflexes of that. And the means were used to actually tackle an overarching macroeconomic condition, right? That probably isn't the case now. But I think that it's still... When we talk about this innovative industry like crypto digital assets, privacy is an issue, and I think that control is another issue. And honestly, I do see regulators thinking about that and considering that when actually trying to understand and regulate it all. Well, we need to take into perspective that this is not an easy task as well, right? So there comes this new technology, innovative, with the potential to actually revamp the whole financial system in the world, and we bestow upon regulators the responsibility to actually organize it, right? So it takes a while for them to understand. I think that we do play a role in actually working with them and helping them to understand what they're doing, what it's all about. But I think that it's also up to us to ensure that the means are going to be able to be used how they were built or how they were created, and not to be clouded by the needs to actually control the ends. You're talking about, confiscation, the whole macroeconomic condition. We do have one element in the regulatory discussions that are self-custodial wallets that could fit into that discussion beautifully, right? But again, to me, I think the way that I'll answer to that is that we need to be cautious and careful about how the means are to be treated to actually control the ends. And we are part of the discussion as well, right? We shouldn't wash our hands and say regulators or the state shouldn't be doing that. We should take this step forward and actually try to participate in that discussion.
Another question? In the back there?
Hi. So my name is Evie. I work at Soma. We do Web3 marketing with institutional narratives. Thank you all for being on the panel. And I'm very happy to see this very positive sentiment for institutional adoption. But my question was a little bit related to Carolina's as well, more about the dark side of regulation. Because, Aaron, I'm very happy what you say, that you feel like we're crossing the chasm, and I think regulation is basically what's the fundament of enabling that. But then, Juliana, you mentioned, we are having MiCA, and we're having different regulations in the US and in here. So doesn't that create, kind of a non-interoperable ecosystem globally? I feel like if we're going to have a centralized regulation in Europe and in the US and in Latam, it kind of goes contrary to the whole philosophy of Web3, which is decentralization. So do you think this is a threat, or is it just the fact that we're in the beginning of the adoption?
Well, my opinion is that something that we need to figure out with the regulators, ideally, is that they have MiCA and Brazil have other ones, and they will talk to each other to find a global one. But we have a lot to work with them on this. Thinking about crypto and blockchain, it's really new. It's an early stage market. So I think to reshape the whole financial system would take some years to enable that. So I feel like we're really in the beginning of a new financial era. And for sure, it's an obstacle that needs to be addressed. But let's see how our companies like Circle or BitGo or Transfero, all the companies really influencing and being closer to the regulators to enable them to be similar and connected to a global goal.
Thank you.
And then speaking just as myself here, not on behalf of anybody, but I think for this, I take your point about how, okay, are we going to have a kind of a fractured regulatory system globally? But I think on probably 90% of the issues, I think most of these folks have basically the same objectives, right? Whether it's protecting consumers, preventing Ponzi schemes, preventing money laundering, being able to track bad guys when there is money laundering, when there is illicit activity happening. Securities regulation, usually on the securities front, most other securities regulators just kind of follow what the US SEC is doing, generally speaking. And it'll be interesting to see how much the U.S. models its legislation, its framework after what's been done in Europe, or how much the final U.S. bill or framework looks like Europe. I think, given that there's some tension between those two markets right now, I don't necessarily think that they're going to just copy and paste. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in Latin America and other parts of the world. Okay, who do we want to follow? Do we want to follow the U.S. or do we want to follow Europe? Right. But I think probably 90% of these issues are all things that pretty much everyone agrees on. I think the other 10% are the things that you mentioned in your question about some of these more sensitive issues about self-custodial and privacy and kind of the censorship resistance element, right? Which is, in my view, if you have Bitcoin without censorship resistance, you don't really have anything, right? That's the reason it has value, is because it is censorship resistant. So this is a thing that, even though it's becoming institutionalized and it's we're crossing the chasm to Wall Street, it is still a fundamentally disruptive asset. Those properties have not changed. So how that's all going to play out, we have to wait and see. So, but it is a really good question. So thank you for raising that.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else? Other questions? Preferably provocative, spicy questions if you have them. Curveballs. Jabuticabas. I don't know. Well, I have Maybe I have one here. I'd like to talk about specifically about Brazil, since we're obviously familiar in the Brazil market here, and maybe this would be a good chance to just give kind of an update. Maybe Daniel, since I know you're probably pretty knees deep in this stuff, but maybe give an update on just like what is the status of. We've gone through 3 public consultations with the central bank. One of those was around stable coins. We're in the process now, or the bank is in the process now of kind of finalizing everything, of trying to package it, to take the public feedback, to take the comments, put this into a regulatory framework that will come out now. I think they're saying the second half of this year it's going to be coming out. But maybe give us like some more color on like how this has all progressed, like kind of or what's the state of this activity right now, and what are kind of what's the TLDR that people should know about this?
Can I just make a quick comment about your question, because I think that's a very good one, and I think that so we normally have the tendency to look at regulators and to imagine that, hey, you have a problem, just fix it, right? Or you have the need to regulate something, just write a bill. But I think that here what we're talking about is an inherently global industry or tool, right? So again, digital assets and crypto, they were born not to be bound by frontiers, right? They're bound to work in the globe, and the responsibility for jurisdictions is to organize their own circumscription. It's not an easy task. It's not to be taken for granted. I think that the good news on that is that there are already talks about rules harmonization by BIS, the FSP, that are on the table. So there is guidance, there is recommendations that they are being taken seriously by jurisdictions and countries. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. Again, not an easy task, not to be taken for granted, but light at the end of the tunnel. I think that this connects to your question, Aaron. I think that, again, Brazil is fairly advanced in all of this. I think that sometimes when it comes to rulemaking, democracy is an additional step to overcome. Important, should be included, but important. So we had the 3 consultations recently that were presented in 2024, end of the year. Deadline closed in February 2025. Last I heard, more than 400 suggestions and individual suggestions or recommendations were offered to the central bank. So now they're having to go through all those 400 to actually, extract some of those opinions or recommendations that they deem useful and add that to the regulation, right? I think that when we look at Brazil, the interplay that we should see now is twofold. It's on the one hand, what happens on the regulatory scene with the central bank mainly, but also with CVM, on the matters that concern to CVM. But also we should be attentive to what happens at the National Congress. There are some important concepts that are being discussed there. I think that the other thing for us to take into consideration is the actual bandwidth and capacity for regulatory agencies and bodies in Brazil to make those things through. And again, it's not the same thing to actually have regulations enacted and have regulations enforced. That needs bandwidth, and that requires actually capable people to making this happen. So, long story cut short, it is our desire. I think I can say that for the industry that we have those rules seeing the light of day still at some point 2025. People is talking about the second semester, but again, it's not a given. But it's also important for us to try and understand and follow this very closely as to how those rules are to be enforced. And how can we actually make something out of those rules, right? Those rules need to be in place, but those rules need to be applicable and enforced so we can have a sounder system that we can all operate under and that we can help, build for the future.
Anybody else want to chime in? Any final thoughts before we wrap up here?
I think there is not massive adoption without rules. At the end of the day, we live in a world where we need rules to do the things that we want. In both sides of the market are bad actors. There's bad governments and bad actors. And I think that most of us are in the middle. In order to achieve that massive adoption, in order to solve the problems that we already have, we need regulations, and we are figuring out all together, companies, institutions, and governments. So,
great. Well, thanks everybody for your time today. Thank you, Daniel, Alvaro, Juliana, for your time, for your participation here. And if you scan that QR code, don't forget to claim your swag at the booth over here. And yeah, we'll wrap it up. Thanks, everybody.